Thank you so much all for joining. This is a basic introduction to open data. If you've never heard of it or never worked with it, this is like a really great contextual start. And there's just so much more to explore, but this will be sort of like that fundamental 101 class that will enable you to continue layering on with a sturdy foundation to build.
So the purpose is to demystify NYC open data. There's a ton of public information available and not everyone knows they have access to it. So the goal for this presentation is to make you understand different types of data out there and how you might use it to make informed decisions and help your everyday life. It can range from helping your business to 311 requests. So big thank you to a ton of community organizations involved to make this possible, including Open Data Week. Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, also known as MODA, has been instrumental in bringing all of this together. And of course, BetaNYC, who helps publish some of the tools that let you visualize some of this data. As I mentioned before, BetaNYC is a civic organization dedicated to improving the lives of New Yorkers through open data, technology, and design. And again, that really means being able to create programs that help the data come to life to help you make sense of what's going on in New York City.
New York City government is a pretty large system. We already have a little bit of the budget system. We see a 90+ billion budget, as well as like a 8.6 million residents, 65 million tourists annually. So we have a pretty large thing going on right here. The scale of New York City is overwhelming. We have 51% of our city lives living in or near poverty, and that is about 6 million people. We have 1.1 million students in New York City schools. If we were to compare that to a city, it would be the 10th largest city in America. We also have 500,000 people living in public housing. That would also be similar to the city of Atlanta living in public housing. There are also 18,000 miles of pavement and sidewalk. That's enough miles to go to and back here from Hawaii, and also go back from the Pacific as well and end up in San Francisco. We have a really extensive New York City government, and we have about 325,000 government employees in here. And so it would be like the 4th largest government in the USA. There are also many people electives like the public advocate, the comptroller, the borough presidents that we elect. We also have like the city council members and many different community boards. This is a map of New York City. You can see there, it's pretty extensive. If we just simplify it, we can simplify it to the 3 different branches of the government. So there's like the executive's office, which would be like the mayor's office. There's like the judicial, which would be like the judges and the district attorneys. And then our community boards would be like the legislative. So we have 50+ agencies, but then the number is always changing because the mayor is adding and removing the agencies according to the society, how it's changing and what's going on. Just a little bit of background again. In 2010, open data legislation was introduced, and in 2012, the passage of New York City's open data law was created. And so there were also amendments to the law because it wanted to be perfect and more improved for the people to be, so it's a better law. This is the open data. Like I said, with the New York City being very big, there are a lot of data sets and information about New York City. So we can see there's more than 3,000 data sets. There are approximately 100 open data coordinators, etc. The New York City's open data program was administered by 2 cities, the Mayor's Office of Data and Analytics and the Department of Information Technology and Telecommunication. They work together with about a network of 100 open data coordinators and staff who were responsible for identifying and structuring the New York City open data. As a result of their collaborative work, they were able to create more than 3,000 different data sets, and it included 300 more to be published last year. You can see that more than 1.5 million people visited the New York City open data in 2020. So more than half was from New York City people, and then the others were from around the world and around the US.
NYC Open Data is a bunch of data sets on anything you can imagine from government. So it can be a list of community board complaints. It could be crime rates. We're going to show you a few examples of how people are putting this data to action and what that really means. And why is open data important? If you're not getting it already, we want to help the public make informed decisions. We want to help communities advocate for change, but in order to do so, you need evidence. Like any business proposition, or if you're a lawyer, we always need evidence, and data is the way to communicate with people to show there is a need for this. It quantifies why we need to take action. So an example, of course, of a very big data set in NYC open data is the people's data set 311. So again, this could be potholes. This could be if your water isn't being turned on, if you're having issues with landlords, rent. I'm sure all of you are familiar with 311. I'm going to introduce you to a tool called BoardStat. BoardStat is a data visualization tool. So it allows you to look at the data in the forms of graphs and maps and makes it come to life. And BoardStat has all of this community information from 311. To go to BoardStat, you would type in the URL on the top of the page, BoardStat BetaNYC. You could pick which borough you're in. So for this example, we're going to be looking at Manhattan. You're going to click into Manhattan and you'll be brought to this. This is a way to filter exactly what community board and area you want to specify. So again, you'd make this relevant to you. And in this example, we're going to use community board 12. And you can filter by the complaint type. Once you've selected what you want to look at, you're going to want to populate a date range on the very top. So you can see we're going to be looking at over a year's worth of data into the future. So it's most up to date. There's a few things going on here. On the very small graph on the left, you can see the different types of complaints by communities. We have some noise complaints, we have heat, water complaints, vehicle complaints, illegal parking, etc. And on the bottom, you can filter so you can see what's most prevalent. If you look at this table on the bottom hand, loud party music in this area was a huge issue for residents. And then on the right-hand side, you can look at where this is actually happening. Some more ways to visualize this. We can look at complaints over time. So we see here that 2018, we had a lot of complaints. You can also look at something called a tree map, which is all these squares at the middle of the page. And again, the idea is to be able to make some sense of all of this data. On the bottom table, you'll see a bunch of rows, but what does that really mean? So BoardStat's a tool to help you understand and see the amount of complaints in this instance. And you can also look up specific addresses. So under date range, you'll see enter address. You can get very granular and make it relevant to where you live. So this is just an example of one of those visualizations. We can see on the map in a specific area that there's a heat and hot water complaint on West 180th Street. And these are interactive, right? So you can click into the maps and go to different locations. We can also see missed garbage collection. So this is just highlighting a few of the different use cases for BoardStat. We can also see homelessness issues. So where are the most homeless people, which is pretty common and unfortunate in Manhattan. Okay. You can also look at things like how long does it take for them to actually answer you? You'll submit a complaint and you want your request to be addressed in a certain amount of time. That's called creating a ticket. So in this instance, we see it takes about 3 days, closer to 4 if you round, to close an actual ticket. So that just means that 311 is meeting your request. And in this bar graph, you can see all of the different community departments. So we have the police department, health department, fire department, Department of Education, etc., different agencies. So this is really interesting and timely. The newest thing we can look at is COVID-related complaints. So you'll see in these bars, the pink represents non-emergency police matters like social distancing. And again, these are complaints. And in the orange, you can see different types of complaints like noise or vehicle-related complaints. And this is looking again over the course of a year. And it looks like if you're reading this, June had a ton of complaints, although we're not sure what that gray is. So that is BoardStat.
We do have a question. Can we filter by zip code or neighborhood? Yeah, absolutely. You can filter by zip code in the open data platform itself. Every 311 service request is given a zip geographic identifier such that you can indeed filter by zip code. However, BoardStat is built completely around community districts. So in BoardStat, we don't have a view that breaks down the data by community board, by zip code per se. So for that purpose, you would need to head to the source of the data, which we will be showing you later on in the presentation, which is the New York City Open Data Platform. So Allison, I hope that answers your question. BoardStat was built with and for community boards specifically. So these pages are oriented toward how they use 311 data within their district office and within their board meetings, et cetera. So the zip code filter is not built into this tool. Okay, great. Thanks, Allison. And thanks, Star.
No problem. And let me know if there are any other questions, Emily. I've lost one of my screens, but just
Totally.
tell me.
Yep.
Okay. All righty, let's continue. So as Emily just alluded to, when you go to the actual source of the data, you have the ability to get much more granular and filter by things like zip code. So, all right, to get there, you're going to type in NYC open data in Google or whatever search engine you use, and you're going to click on data. So we encourage you guys to actually sign in. This allows you to save your data sets if you want to refer back to them. So to sign in, you'll just create an account. It says sign up on the very bottom of the box, and then you can continue. All right, so getting to the actual data. So you can see in the search box on the bottom of the page, we've typed in 311 because we're going to try to access the BoardStat data set. Okay, so this is what appears when you hit 311, and under it, you'll see all sorts of relevant data sets, but we're going to click on the top one. Okay, so when you click into it, you're going to see an overview of the data, some metadata on what this data set is. So it'll tell you when it was recently updated, what was made public, how long it is. And on the top right-hand box, that's where we're going to focus on. So where it's blue and says view data, we're going to be clicking into there, and you'll see that's got a nice red circle in case you can't find it. Okay, so when you click view data, you get the actual overview of the data. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, we have some rows, which you'll see with the 24.5 million, and then columns. And the columns represent all of the different types of fields or topics, if you will, in the data set. And to actually filter by zip code to answer that question, you look on the right-hand side where it's blue and it says filter. Okay, so in this case, we're doing it by complaint type, but you could also use the zip code to filter. Okay. So if you were using it for complaint type, filtering by it, these are some of the options that you would see. So it could be noise, water systems, plumbing, etc. Okay, so to get to the filtering, in this instance, we're using the community board and we've selected our complaint type. So you're going to fill in a little bit more information. The date range will be very important, and then the actual agency. So in this case, we're looking at the Department of Sanitation as the agency. Okay, so after doing all those steps, you would have a completely filtered data set. And again, you could do the same exercise based on the drop-down options on the right or the zip code. You would just choose that as the field you'd want to filter by. Okay, I know I went through that quickly. Any questions on accessing the open data sets? All right, just let me know and we can go back. Okay, so these are some examples of other really cool data sets. And again, to see this, you go to the main portal, NYC Open Data. You'll see in the second field, it says data. Okay, so there's something called the project gallery, and these are a bunch of tools, kind of like BoardStat, but not specific to the community board. Again, they're data visualization tools to help you understand different types of data. So you'll see the sidewalk widths, for example. That was a recent one with COVID. Somebody wanted to assess the width of sidewalks and see how that impacts social distancing. So let's say in your community, you had a very narrow sidewalk. Something you might want to advocate for is having them extended so you don't have to walk with people on top of you, especially if they're not necessarily wearing masks. So another cool one, you can check out how your driving is by entering your vehicle information and plate. So there's also things for tenants, which is huge. So any sort of displacement. I know that's a pretty popular one with BetaNYC. Okay, this is going back to the sidewalk width. So this is just a way to visualize it. It looks like in this instance, it was a width of 12 feet, which makes it difficult for social distancing. All right, so these are some resources. And again, you can access this deck with the bit.ly and we can send this out to you in the chat so you have it because there's a lot of detail and things to cover. We just wanted to give a high-level overview. But this resource page will be really helpful because it has links to everything we showed in these slides. So if you're interested specifically at the community board level, you would look at BoardStat. If you want to see information from 311 that pertains to your specific area, you have that link. Checking out BetaNYC would be really helpful because there's always events going on to engage the community. And with that said, this is wrapping up our presentation, but I'd love to open it up to questions because there was a lot to cover. So.
All right, so thank you, Star. A couple of sort of logistical things here. Can we make that link that you provided accessible to all? Star, could you do that in the background?
Yep,
That would be great.
I will work on that.
Okay, great. So everybody, we're working on that link accessibility that will be addressed ASAP. We have definitely some questions in the chat, and please continue to put them in here. We've got some time left, and we'd love to address questions that you have. Let's see here. So we've got okay. So we've got something scrolling up to the top. So okay. So starting with Amy's question. So BoardStat is different from open data. So yeah. 311 is one data set out of the 3,000 that are available on the open data platform. It just happens to be one of New Yorkers' sort of favorite data sets because it represents what the people are thinking and feeling and experiencing in New York. And it really does reflect sort of the culture of different neighborhoods and even zip codes for that matter, considering someone mentioned zip codes earlier. But again, 311 is one data set out of 3,000 that are available. But because 311 is so popular across various sectors and different people use it for different things, community boards use it, the general public uses it, students use it all the time, high-level researchers are using it to investigate things like correlations between heat and hot water requests and low-income residents, things like that. So it's a popular data set among so many people, and especially at the government level. So the BoardStat is built on 311, one data set, to help you understand it, because it's so massive. It's 25 million rows at this point. So someone asked, can we download the raw data? And the answer is yes. In the open data platform, all the data sets can be exported in a variety of different formats, to touch on another question that was asked. But 25 million rows is a lot of data. You're not going to be able to even open that in Excel or Google Sheets or anything like that. It's just too big, which is why we stress and emphasize filtering the data to something that you are more concerned about. However, if you are one of those high-level researchers and have the software that can accommodate the 25 million rows, then go ahead and feel free, of course. So hopefully that answers a couple of questions that have been asked. Yep, anyone can just raise their hand or just speak up. So someone then asked, would it be possible to get addresses with names? So no, 311 data does not publish any names whatsoever in the data. In that sense, it aims to be as completely anonymous and private as possible. Okay, so it looks like we've answered a few of these questions. Will we get a list of these? So it looks like this slide deck, if it's not available yet, it certainly will be soon, but it probably is even already. So yes, you'll get a list of everything here. Okay, let's see what Keishan says. Instead of entering a term in the search bar within the open data portal, is it possible to get a list of all available topics? That's a great question. Does anyone in the room who also has experience with open data feel like taking that question? If not, I'm happy to. But anyone in the room who is experienced wants to sort of address Keishan's question about getting a list of available topics?
So Emily, I'm happy to take the question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach.
I also did my best to answer in chat, but I see Star and a few others have suggestions as well. Hi, everyone. Zachary Fader from the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, worked on the Open Data Program. So there are a few different things, and I put this in the chat a little bit up, but I'll drop it in again. There's actually a data set of data sets, so you can see for each data set who published it, when it was last updated, a link to it, and all this information about it. And there's a link to that. You could also look at data sets by city agency. If there's a particular topic that you think you might be interested in, you can see what that looks like. But then there's a few suggestions as well. If you could just browse through data sets and you can see them either by most popular or most recently published. And those are a few good ways to look at across different data sets and see a bit of what's available. But there is a large amount of information. So if you do have a question, we have a help desk where you could either get an answer from us or from one of the agencies that manage the data if you ever have a question about one of the data sets, and you can see a contact us button at the top of the page.
Does open data repurpose the census or the community survey in a much more detailed and specific way for the city?
I'm just trying to see who was is that Mamadou speaking?
Yes.
Okay. Could you repeat that question one more time? Now
I'm speaking about the census, the decennial census and the annual American Community Survey.
Sure. Yep. Okay.
As
Good.
open data repurpose the numbers for the city specifically?
Great question. So open data does have census data in the platform. The last I checked, it was from like 2010 or something like that. So 2020 data is certainly not on the open data platform yet, but it probably will be. And New York City Open Data does, when it hosts census data, it does repurpose it, just as you said, to New York City only. So you should feel free to check for what's the most recently made available census data on the open data platform, and whatever you find, you can be confident that it will be repurposed to New York City only.
Thank you.
All right, should we check out some other questions here? So we've got, is there a list of open data projects in progress that need help to find out how we can get involved with them? Wow, Pamela, that is a great question. And I don't believe there is something quite like that, but that sounds, Zachary's shaking his head no, but that sounds like something that's very much up the alley of both what BetaNYC and Moda would be interested in figuring out. So thanks for putting such a great question on there, and we will think about that. You can certainly join the BetaNYC Slack. So BetaNYC sort of represents the civic technology, like a public community of the city. And there's tons of conversations about these kinds of projects that happen. So keeping an eye out on for projects would work. Or perhaps we can come up with a system within that Slack channel for that kind of communication. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to join the BetaNYC Slack, and we'll make sure that you know how to do that. That'll put you in a community of people who are interested in things like this. Great. Okay. Can you talk about the difference between getting the data from open data versus the Socrata Portal? That's a great question. And the answer is that as far as I'm concerned, those are one and the same. The open data platform, the New York City Open Data Platform, is the Socrata Portal. So Socrata is the company that powers the city's open data platform.
Emily, if I could just add on to that too, in terms of where you would want to use each one, I would use NYC Open Data if you need a quick answer or if you're just not technically savvy. So if you don't know what an API is, stick to NYC Open Data. In some instances, like Emily said, you're probably not even going to want to download the data set. But if you need like a quick answer and you know exactly what you're looking for, you can access the data set online, as we showed in the demonstration, for a quick answer. And if you need to do an in-depth data exploration and you plan to be digging into the data for a long time, then I would advise using Socrata. Just looking through some of these questions in the chat too, trying to get to everyone. This is great.
Yeah, this is great, everyone. Okay, so how do you finance the platform? What is the business model behind the platform? Ooh, that sounds like a question for Moda.
So the platform, open data, is made available as a public service. Funding for it comes out of the city's budget. It is written as discussed before, with a lot of help from advocates and elected officials into the city's law. So it's something that we do, that the city provides as a result of these laws, and also something that we provide for free for anyone, whether you want to use it for nonprofit, whether you want to use it for personal education, or whether you want to use it to like start a company and build that around it. All of those things are encouraged officially for use of New York City Open Data.
All right. So from Karen, we have, what limits should we be aware of when attempting to download data sets? Also, how often are data sets updated? And if we're interested in one, are we allowed to pull some of this programmatically, say once a day, once a week, etc.? Okay, so I'll start with this question. What limits should we be aware of when attempting to download data sets? Honestly, sometimes you may want to download a data set in a particular format that it may not be available in, or have the right software to open it up and work with it on your own computer. But honestly, exporting the data straight from the open data platform, yeah, I'm not sure if you, Karen, if you want to speak to what more you mean by that, that would be great. Let me just quickly just say while you're coming off of mute, how often are these data sets updated? So that's a great question. So every data set is updated sort of in keeping with the particulars of the data set and the agency. So 311 data is updated every single day. Other data sets that don't grow so much every day are not going to be updated every day. So I used to work at the city's Landmarks Preservation Commission that posts data on historic districts. And there's only like a new historic district designated every some odd months. So that data is not updated every day. That data may be updated like quarterly per year, something like that. So depending on the data and the agency, the update date is going to reflect that. As far as pulling the data programmatically, I'm going to need someone else to jump into that one. But Karen, is there anything you wanted to explain about what you meant exactly by what limits you should be aware of?
So for instance, if I'm interested in exploring a data set and building something on my side to kind of pull this data incrementally every day, is there a limit in terms of, like, say if I downloaded maybe 10 megabytes of data or whatever, like I'll get like a warning that says, oh, you've exceeded your quota for the day. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Got you, Karan. Okay. Anyone from Moda?
Yeah, so there aren't limits. Within reason, you could download the data as many times as you'd like programmatically. The APIs are not intentionally not metered. And just put a link to sign up for one of those tokens. If you're just pulling the data without one, I think there's a limited number of rows it will retrieve. But again, with a little bit of work in advance, you shouldn't have any trouble there. And again, if you do, just send us a message and we'll figure it out.
Great, thank you, Zachary. All right, we've got another question from Keishan. Are all the data sets that are on New York City Open Data available as structured data? Are there any data sets that are unstructured? I think they're all, they're all structured because yes, there are required formats that every open data coordinator from the agencies have to make sure that the data is in before it gets hosted on open data. So yes, they're all going to be structured data sets.
I will add to that, if there's a particular unstructured data set that you'd like to see made available, through that same help desk, you can request the data. But yeah, Emily is correct that right now we only have structured data sets on open data for the moment.
Awesome, thank you guys.
All right, so now we have a question about like a very specific data set. So do you know if there's a layer that contains the weekly and weekend road closures sent out by the NYC DOT?
So I think this is another example of a good data set request. We look at data set requests by the number of requests we receive, and agencies are required to respond to let you know the data is somewhere on the open data portal. If the data is not on the open data portal, let you know when it will be made available or if it's not available. This right now, I believe, is stored in something that is not a structured data set, so it is not available. I don't believe there is a data set of road work, but I don't know if road closures are in there. I can follow up with you in a little bit, Tim, if you want to message me with your contact, or just send a message into that open data. I'm also on the BetaNYC Slack, but also you can send a message to the open data help desk, and we can figure out what exactly you're looking for and if it exists. But again, if you're ever looking for a data set and you're not able to find it, you can request it and it'll be available, or it'll be like, we'll let you know whether it exists, and if it does exist, we'll let you know when it'll be able to be made available.
And one suggestion when you're looking for, among the 3,000 data sets that are available, it can be kind of like overwhelming on some level. So if somebody has a particular issue that they're interested in, oh, great, Allison, we'll definitely address the Slack issue. If someone has a particular, community issue that they're interested in, and this NYC DOT example is great. So Tim is saying that, he gets the weekly email that kind of aggregates this information for him, but he'd kind of maybe like to access that raw data so that he could analyze it in his own way, which is the beauty of having the open data, raw data available to everyone in the public, is that we don't just have to rely on the visualizations that are created by others, but can do it ourselves, because there's biases associated with every single way that one visualizes or reports data. So in this case, just back to the kind of nuts and bolts. So on the open data platform, you can filter by agency. So you could just immediately filter those 3,000 results to the Department of Transportation, for instance. That would at least get you somewhat started. And you could also just search for road closures in the search bar, and that would also help. Is anyone in the room? Okay, so some people are. Is anyone? So some people are in the room are on the BetaNYC Slack channel already. Is that right? We've got some hands or thumbs ups. Or yeah, it's a great platform for communicating with each other. I'm going to try to get some quick instructions for that on the in the chat. Any other questions? Are there, anyone have any ideas of, when they open up this platform, when they have some free time next, like what they might be looking for, what topics interest them, or any data projects in mind? Gale Brewer, who's the Manhattan Borough president, whose term will be ending in January, was, as Star said, was the person who initially sort of introduced this, the legislation that became the open data law back in 2010. So we are, over 10 years down the road with this open data infrastructure and laws in New York City. And, there's just example after example of how it's being used for, the social good. So, okay, cool. So people are beginning to look at accessibility data, demographics, and income data. Okay, great. But, the question is, whether people feel comfortable sort of working with the data. Not everyone has any, statistics background or has taken classes in this. And so, in partnership with MODA, and there's plenty of other entities out there as well who work on sort of making sure that people have some basic knowledge and skills to, start looking at this information. That it's not just available, but that it's usable and useful to the general public. So that's sort of a big long-term goal that everybody's sort of, working on. Bearing in mind that that it's not easy necessarily to explore this data, but the open data platform really does sort of make it as straightforward as absolutely possible. Okay, so we're just looking at some other things. What are some examples of open data projects having an impact, whether it be through policy or education? So I'll talk about an open data set that I have a lot of experience working with over the last few years, which would be data on evictions that's on the open data platform. So that data took a long time to be able to make it available on open data. But it's there now. At least a portion of the data is there now. And what it does is help tenant organizing groups and affordable housing groups target their resource, know better now where evictions are happening in the city, and target their resources effectively toward helping those individuals who may be vulnerable to eviction. So without that data, there would be no sort of like bird's eye understanding or view of the eviction phenomenon in the city. But with it, there is. Another one that our Civic Innovation Fellows just looked at was data on women and minority-owned businesses, which is relevant considering we've just finished Black History Month and today at International Women's Day. And so this data on women and minority-owned businesses, certified businesses, helps us also understand where these individuals or businesses have sought the certification, which opens up the door to a variety of perks, so to speak, once you become a certified women or minority-owned business, right? And so by understanding better the spatial landscape of which businesses have gone through the process to become certified, we again can target our resources to informing women and minority-owned businesses that are seemingly not, applying for that certification to be aware of it and to do so if they choose. And the examples go on and on. So it's a great it's a great conversation, and we should continue it. But I just want to keep going here. Okay, so on the BetaNYC site, is there a way to see definitions for complaint types and descriptor? For example, looking at complaint type curb condition, descriptor broken, is there a way to see what those definitions are? That's a good question, Eliza. I think that the complaint types and the descriptors are meant to be so sort of specific that they're supposed to be kind of self-explanatory. As far as I know, I don't know of a place where there are definitions for complaint types and descriptors. Maybe Zachary's going to jump in.
You can find definitions for some of them depending on the data set. I know 3-in-1 data set, there's a whole lot of different things in the data set's data dictionary. But for that one in particular, I do believe that there, to your point, Emily, there are some complaint types that are not defined in detail. This is another example of, like, if you put a request in, just because there are so many data sets and so many different agencies, we can have the agency that's responsible for it update the documentation to include whatever information you're looking for, and then also answer the distinction between, as you were saying, like a curb condition or a broken curb or all those other small nuances within the data set.
Okay, great. All right, so someone's saying, can you share your screen and do a sample search using filters? Wow, should we end we are sort of wrapping up a little bit, so should we end the day with a live demo? Anyone on the BetaNYC team want to do it? A sample search using filters? If not, I'm happy to do it. Okay, I'll do it. All right, so let me just make sure that we've got the open data platform up. Alrighty, great. So let's see here. Okay, and yes, Star, I will grant access. The one-page resource guide will be made available to everybody for sure. Okay, let me do this. Share screen. Okay, so here we are. We have just typed New York City Open Data Platform into Google, and here we go. We're going right now to the data. Does anyone want to throw out an idea of something to look at? Doesn't have to be 311, but it could be, and we can do a filter on any data set out there. Evictions, COVID, women and minority-owned businesses, 311, buildings, crime. Someone throw out an idea.
Bus data?
Bus data. All right, let's do it. Bus. Let's see what we get. Okay, so we are waiting for this thing to work. And all right, so let's see what we get here. So first of all, we're getting 53 results for bus data. So there's a lot of different things about buses, right? And these are the available results. I'm not sure who said that. Was it Karan? Whoever did say that, is there anything you're seeing here that is the specific data set you'd like to jump into?
Bus lanes, local streets map.
Bus lanes, local streets. Okay, so this is going to be, as you can see here, this is going to be a data set, not a map, which means that the data is going to be available in like spreadsheet form rather than map form. Before we get into the data, it takes us to this thing called the About page, which is really great because it says, hang on a second, before you jump into the data, why don't you try to understand a little bit about it? So in this case, the data is updated annually, as we can see here. It tells us how frequently it's updated. So speaking to the question from before, it also tells us what agency it goes through and lots of other things about it. It's got 27 columns of information, over 2,400 rows, and it also points us to a data dictionary, which will tell us much more about this data set before we get into it. But in the interest of time, I'm gonna be a rogue and not look at the data dictionary and just jump into the data itself. So the question was about doing a filter. So we're gonna wait for this data set to load, and then we see here we've got these tabs here, and that is where we can download the data by the export tab. So export gives us all these different file formats to export by. We can visualize the data if you want to get a little fancy with the open data platform. So for those of you who are comfortable, you should definitely explore the visualization tab, which enables you to do some quick visualizations right here and there. but the filter is what y'all had suggested originally. So, so why don't we take a quick scan at this data? We've got the street, we've got the segment, we've got the borough, we've got the hours, days. So you'd have to really spend a lot more time kind of understanding this data before you could, I have never looked at it myself, before you can really make sense of it. But just for the exercise of doing a filter, oops, sorry, sometimes this, let's go back to it. For the exercise of doing a filter, let's do a quick filter on something like something straightforward like borough. Or we could do it on, the hours that it's operating. These are all interesting things. So what we can do here is add, and in this case, if we chose borough, we're going to select the column to filter by. So that's going to be the borough column. So we're going to select borough, and then what we need to do is pick the borough that we're interested in. So someone call out a borough. There's only 5 of them, as far as I know. Queens. All right, Queens. So we can see here that the borough information is like coded in like capital letters, like an abbreviation. So I'm going to assume that Queens is going to be QNS. Although, again, if I were being a better data person, I would make sure. But let's see what happens. So I'm going to click that for, oh, okay. Thankfully, that worked out. So what we've got here is now we have filtered our data to just the Queens bike lanes. And we are at 450 rows out of the original, what did they say? I think 2,450, something like that. So now we have a filtered data set. So, that's, and then you might want to export it and say, all right, now I'm going to do some analysis in my own comfort of my own spreadsheet software. But you could continue to work on it in here. There's tons of ways to continue to sort of analyze this data in the open data platform. And this class was really just meant to kind of introduce and provide a context for all of this information. We have follow-up classes that take you deeper into it, and definitely let us know if that's of interest, and we'll make sure that those classes become public in the near future. But because we're at time, I am going to stop sharing and just get back to some questions and stuff. Okay, great. So yeah, I guess I would just like to kind of emphasize how working for these number of years with the Manhattan Borough President, with BetaNYC, with MODA on open data, I have seen so many instances in which it has really helped us better understand what's going on in our city and work toward making more fair policies. And so with that, a huge advocate. It's still sort of like we've just hit scratched the tip of the iceberg with this all, but we need to, keep chipping away and working at, those important use cases and using this information to make the city a better place for all. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you throughout the week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.